Great to have everybody on. Excited about this conversation. I'm Andrew Pryfogle, founder and CEO of CX Effect, and we're excited to welcome to our webinar series here Brian Z, who's the co-founder at Assembled. Brian, welcome, man. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, indeed. We're excited about you guys being in our ecosystem, Brian. We're getting some great traction with you guys. Customer feedback is fantastic. Our partners are really leaning in with you guys. And I love what you guys are doing around really redefining the whole workforce management space. As I talk about finally a modern approach to workforce management. I mean, we've been doing it the same way for so long, and it's really refreshing how you guys approach this. Before we dive into kind of some details around that, give us some color, if you will, on Assembled. You and your co-founder started this company, had a big idea, I know. Talk about it.
Sure, yeah. So just to let you know what Assembled is, it's a modern workforce management platform. We're lucky enough to support users like Cash App, Stripe, Etsy, the leading CRM provider out there. So all companies that kind of, in our mind, represent where support is headed, and companies that kind of make us and push us to kind of develop Assembled in a way that's uniquely suited for modern environments of all shapes and sizes. The founding story of Assembled actually started at Stripe, where me and my two fellow co-founders worked, Ryan and John Wang. They are also brothers.
Yeah.
And it kind of was born out of our lived experience of, seeing Stripe scale up very quickly and seeing kind of this very critical but very underserved team called customer support just constantly break under the stress of kind of a constantly evolving support landscape. So I was originally running the go-to-market team at the time. Ryan was one of Stripe's first machine learning engineers. John was one of Stripe's first dashboard engineers. We all decided to kind of just, dive face first in and start kind of building tools for Stripe customer support team as I was kind of going through the stages of bringing on BPOs and adding new specializations and channels. We kind of fell in love with the space and ultimately found the courage to leave Stripe and start Assembled. With the goal of helping modern support teams kind of evolve all the things I just mentioned.
Yeah.
At this point, we're about 5. Go for it. Yeah.
No. That's great. That's great. I love that comment from one entrepreneur to another. Had the courage to leave Stripe and go out and start this new business. That's always an exciting and somewhat scary adventure, but it's paid out. It's paid off so far. You guys have built a really cool platform.
It has, and I'm sure you can relate to this. But in those early days, it's a lot of people think it's the stress of working really hard, but it really is the stress of waiting for the phone to ring, and having people really kind of even know that you exist, right? But at this point, we're very lucky to have many hundreds of customers, over 80 million in venture funds raising, and a lot of like flagship brands that we're proud to call partners.
Yeah,
so.
No doubt, and it has been really impressive to see how so many companies are trusting their workforce management requirements to Assembled now. Talk to me a bit about the way workforce management has always been done, and surprisingly, how many companies are still living in the dark ages, if you will, of workforce management. Paint that picture for us, because you guys talk with a lot of companies every day who have been managing their staffs with old technology, or heck, with something as mundane as spreadsheets. Talk about why that still is.
Yeah, it is still a mystery to us in some ways. I think obviously when we left Stripe, we were not workforce management experts,
yeah.
But we kind of magically came into this area because the head of support at Stripe said, "Hey, look, I need to buy this thing called workforce management. I really hate my options. Can you guys kind of explore it?" And I think as we've kind of peeled back that onion, I think the first observation is that it's been a long time since somebody's had a new take in workforce management.
Yeah.
Yet it's obviously a very mission critical part of any support organization. Like, how do you fundamentally plan and match supply and demand toward optimizing customer experience and cost, right? To answer your question specifically, a lot of these legacy workforce management platforms are kind of really kind of stuck in the past, both literally and that like the technology is antiquated, and what does that mean? That means it takes forever to implement, a lot of bad data, a lot of broken integrations, a lot of expensive and horrible support. But it also shows up in kind of their worldview that you see in the product itself. It's still kind of very much focused on inbound call environments, when kind of the world of support has actually changed quite dramatically, especially in the last 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And the largest line item for any business, of course, is labor. And in the world of customer experience and contact centers and support organizations, if CX leaders haven't figured out how to fully optimize labor, they're bleeding cash. And so many companies that we talk to are still in that mode. What do you think is, as you start to think about how CX leaders ought to be reimagining how they plan staffing, how they forecast staffing across multiple channels? Talk about that for a moment. What are the top key considerations that they ought to be thinking about?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you said kind of a word optimizations earlier. I think there's actually a preceding word that's just data, right? Because obviously, if the data is wrong and doesn't represent what your reality is, optimizing is kind of a garbage in, garbage out problem, right? I think the number one thing to recognize is that support environments have just changed very dramatically over the last 10 years. I think there's the obvious point around channel complexity, right? So it used to be inbound phones. Now there's all sorts of asynchronous channels like chat and email and social, right? That is fundamentally, asynchronous, different. These cases get passed around, they get escalated, all that kind of stuff. So, how do you bring visibility into that, and how do you staff a team against that? But there's also just a lot of just work complexity. A lot of technology products today are, frankly speaking, just technology that's enabled by people underneath, right? So if you think about like fintech companies that have teams that are handling those disputes, or marketplaces that are kind of building trust and safety teams, like there's just a lot of coordination and orchestration. And so answering the simple question of just what is happening, what is my team doing, when are customers contacting you, has a lot of subtle complexities that I think kind of requires more holistic thought if you really want to get to a fancy work of optimizing.
Yep. Does the move to remote work and hybrid work that adds a whole nother layer of complexities to people that are leading contact center environments and support organizations? I'm curious how that has fundamentally changed your approach to this problem, right, over the past few years.
Totally. I mean, I think like everyone probably has their own personal, like you could put yourself in the shoes of a support agent, right? Like the promise of remote and people working from home and more flexibility and things like that are, it's not crazy to imagine that, I have a 6-month-old son at home. I want to spend more time with him during certain hours, right? So maybe like I'm willing to work 8 p.m. to midnight, after my son goes to sleep, but I really want to be with him from like 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. And, when he gets, around bedtime. And that fundamentally is what like these, this new work model unlocks.
Yep.
To actually get there, on the other hand, takes a different level of accountability too, right? So like, imagine COVID happens, all of a sudden you have this many thousand person workforce that's all of a sudden like working from home. You can't just stand up on the floor and see what's happening, right? So how do you bring in the right visibility, and how do you show the right metrics to make sure that, hey, look, yes, everyone's a grown up and adult and taking care of their business, while also taking advantage of the new flexibility that kind of these new working styles unlock.
Yeah. It's been a remarkable thing to watch. So many, heck, 3-4 years ago, the idea of somebody having 100% work at home or remote workforce in their contact center was a very, very rare thing. And now it's obviously very commonplace. And it's introducing all sorts of challenges for leaders around how they manage that workforce. The other interesting thing that we're seeing a big increase in here, Brian, is more and more companies leveraging offshore resources and BPOs, and that introduces a whole nother set of complexities that you guys have a very interesting answer to. Talk about that for a moment. This idea of, if I've got 2 or 3 different BPOs that are managing parts of my interactions, right? My visibility into their productivity, frankly, is kind of one-sided, right? And may even have a biased view to it. Talk about how you address and solve for that.
Thanks for bringing that up. That actually relates to kind of what I talked about before. I mean, I talked about complexity and new channels, complexity and new work type. I think what you're really talking about now, both with kind of, work from home and BPOs, is kind of complexity in how you staff support, right? And it goes back to the same fundamental principle of just like, you just need visibility, like just to get, accountability for everyone in in kind of your ecosystem of support, but accountability also leads just to mutual trust about just here's what's happening. I think for us, as we started building out workforce management, we were shocked at two things. One is how common BPO outsourcing was, but number two is how well ill-covered it was by existing workforce management tools.
Yep.
It's pretty obvious, kind of, if you think about it on face value. You always have your CEO breathing down your neck saying, we need a better experience at cheaper cost,
Sure.
And BPO are nominally a way to get cheaper cost, but nobody, does the post-hoc analysis of how does this play out actually, right?
Yeah.
And I think our observation time and time again is that you have these poor people on your team called vendor managers that are relying on this mess of spreadsheets and slides getting passed and forth, between the vendor and between the client, right? There's no real visibility, right? This is all just the honor system of just trust me, the BPO just send you numbers and you're just writing them a check at the end of the day, right? So I go back to kind of two words of accountability, right? I mean, this is the word that, can feel kind of like, PvP, right? Like, but I think it actually does lead ultimately to a longer term, environment of mutual trust, which is kind of just a better place to kind of get to your word, which is optimization together, right?
Yeah.
And tying that back to Assembled, I think what we observed is that, again, it's just a data issue, right? If BPOs have visibility into supply and demand, it just leads to better collaboration, less finger pointing. And that's kind of what Assembled's vendor management tool, which we just launched, kind of provides, right? Allows your vendors to integrate their workforce management tool of choice, right? So you're not forcing them to use your systems, right? It allows your central team within a customer to have visibility into both sides, supply and demand, both from a planning perspective, but also in real time. And you don't have to take my word for it. Actually, we have a pretty nifty interactive demo on the website, assembled.com, if you want to check it out yourself.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've done that, and it is impressive. And for companies that we're working with that have leveraged BPO resources, I had one customer say to me recently, Brian, that as he was starting to evaluate what you guys are doing, he was saying today, we have 3 different BPOs. We've got 400 or 500 people in our contact center. We're distributed all over the place. And he says, my workforce management team wakes up in the ditch every day. Right? They wake up in the ditch every day, and it's based on information they've got incoming from BPOs. It's based on all sorts of, fluidity in their staffing and so forth. And they're trying to kind of on the fly figure this out just by brute force. That's not an uncommon scenario. Am I right?
Not at all. And we have plenty of tools to kind of get you out of that ditch. We have shovels, we have, like tractors, whatever you want for that kind of stuff, right? Around kind of a real-time capabilities. But of course, like the best strategy is not to be in that ditch in the first place,
Sure.
Right? And fundamentally, that's kind of what, your workforce, if you're not getting kind of that, reactive to proactive evolution, you have to wonder what you're buying in your workforce management platform. And again, I would just go back to kind of like, it has to start from kind of a full representation of what your team is doing, both on the demand side, how are customers reaching out to you, and all kind of the new ways that happens, but also on the supply side, how we're talking about, new ways of work, both BPOs and kind of like, people working from home and things like that too.
Yep. Got it. You talk a lot about the power of data, and the you guys have really kind of purpose built the Assembled platform based on accessing lots of different data sources and making that actionable as you plan out your workforce. Talk about what that looks like, because it's more than just seeing kind of arrival patterns in a contact center platform, right? There's a lot that goes into that. What are the other 3, 4, 5 areas that CX leaders ought to be thinking about around data sources in their business that would better inform their decisions around staffing?
Totally. Thanks for bringing that up. I mean, I think, by dint of the fact that we created a workforce management platform in 2020, we have the benefit of being cloud first, and I think, most cloud first tools really think about just like, not them being just this walled garden where everything happens, but, how does this tool integrate to all the other tools within your stack, right? And so I kind of answer your question thinking holistically about like, where is all the places that work happening, right? And how do you bring them into kind of this workforce management system? And kind of on the other end, like, what are all the systems that need this information, both from a reporting perspective, but also from an actioning perspective, right?
Yeah.
And so, that naturally goes to the idea of kind of like an API, right?
Yeah.
I mean, previously, like I said, John and Ryan were top engineers at Stripe, and as hard as customer support is, I guarantee you that none of the integrations we've done here are as difficult as integrating, First Data or Visa or Amex or things like that,
Yeah.
right? So I think we kind of think about kind of getting data in and data out more holistically, right? And that, yes, we obviously have kind of our pre-built connectors to common platforms like, Salesforce and Zendesk and Five9 and Talkdesk and things like that, right?
Yep.
But I think we are probably the only company that has an API flexible enough to bring in kind of arbitrary workload that you might have, right? For instance, like a lot of kind of the health tech companies on our platform, they have some EHR or case management system that kind of like takes up maybe 50% of their agent work. And we can work hand in hand with their engineering team to get that work represented and assembled, right? Or you can just bring whatever platform you want. And I think we're just easier to integrate there. I think on the other side, I think is actually where most legacy workforce management platforms really underestimate the value of it, right? Number one, it is oftentimes the case that most of the people, even within your support team, are not looking at metrics in your workforce management platform, right? They're looking at metrics within a Redshift or a Looker or some other kind of data lake kind of system, right? And so getting data out has been surprisingly valuable as kind of like, a part of our API. And, getting that data out into systems like, HR systems, right? Like Workday to kind of action, like all these integrations just make workforce management work more in concert with kind of the broader support tool stack that you're operating in.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. For a CX leader that's listening to this right now and thinking about how they currently manage, their staffing challenges in their support organization and their sales or customer support organization, when they think about a tool like this, I've said recently that there are not a lot of companies buying nice to haves right now, right? It's that you have to be able to see the hard dollar financial justification for implementing a technology. I know the answer to this question, but I want you to talk about it because there's the financial impact on a business when you're able to intelligently optimize your staffing organization can be massive. Maybe give us some examples of that. What should customers expect?
I think this is one of our favorite parts of workforce management, is that like the results are so kind of like concrete.
Yeah.
It's pretty easy to say, if you have a lot of wasted hours where people aren't really kind of like, needed, that's going to save you money, right? And on the other hand, if you have customers that are kind of just like reaching out and you're just completely understaffed in those moments, that there's some real kind of cost from the customer experience or even revenue experience there. So, I think the most basic one is, something like schedule adherence, right?
Yeah.
Which is just like how often are agents kind of working in adherence to the schedule that they're measuring. Like there's a one-to-one kind of like dollar improvement to kind of like a percentage increase in a schedule adherence. And we've had users like TaskRabbit, like Stripe, tell us that within a month of implementing Stripe, you're talking about 40% improvements in schedule adherence. Other companies like Datadog reported within 3 months of using Assembled, their SLA improved by 50%.
Yeah.
I think an underrated part of workforce management is the agent experience and making your team happy, right? Because obviously, too often we see kind of contact centers where you kind of on this revolving door of agents just churning, right?
Yeah.
And you can imagine that your productivity and your customer experience are some second order function of kind of how long agents are staying. One of actually my proudest metrics is that for Datadog, we surveyed the team after implementing Assembled, and 100% of respondents mentioned that it'd be either very disappointed or extremely disappointed if Assembled went away.
Interesting. Well, congrats. That's significant. I love that. As we build startups out of starting with a big idea to get that kind of validation from people using your tech every day. That's really significant. So the ROI is concrete. It's easy to measure, easy to point out, and lots of examples of where you guys have done that. Brian, I'm curious about what kind of comes next. We've been talking, you and I had a conversation recently about AI and generative AI and all this buzz and noise out there about it. I'm curious what your view is of how generative AI might play a role in the future of how we plan staffing, and what does that say for workforce management platforms? What are your thoughts?
Totally. Super fascinating area. I mean, I think my starting point would be that the refrain that we get from support leaders time and time again is that they're just constantly forced to do more with less, right?
Yeah.
And I think nothing has been sort of like kerosene on the fire more than AI, right? Because you have all these people who are conveniently not in support saying, hey, look, AI will magically automate away all of your support, with a magic wand. But when you actually ask the hard question of how this will happen, there's a lot of great answers for why, right? And so when I think about generative AI in the context of assembled and support writ large, I kind of think about three general things. One is the same old thing of just data and visibility, right? Which is that, I actually think about AI, or more likely kind of the AIs that you're going to be using, as basically another support agent, a support agent that has superpowers that will get more and more powerful over time. But whether they're focused on deflection or agent productivity or something else, support always has the same metrics, right? It's your customers reaching out to you, right? And those interactions will have a first reply time. They will have a first contact resolution time. They will have a handle time, and they will have some quality score, whether that's CSAT or something else, right? AI in its current state focuses a lot on deflection, which we think is kind of an oversimplistic tool, right? Yes, deflection obviously gives you an instant reply time and a shorter handle time, but how about like quality and first contact resolution, right? Are these people just ditching your reflection and calling in much angrier, later, right? Assembled's actually at a unique place where we already have the metrics here, right? Where we think about these things holistically about planning your team. We kind of view it just as another agent on our platform, and bringing visibility into how your AIs are doing, how effective are they, where are they failing, how they can improve.
Interesting.
That's something that we think a lot about bringing onto our platform. So that's one. Maybe I'll stop there and see if you have any questions.
No, that's really insightful. I think I've chatted about this a bunch over the past couple of years of examples as consumers. You and me, Brian, we have lots of examples of automation gone wrong. I think there's been a trend over the past number of years around companies, brands embracing call deflection to the point of call avoidance, right? And the impact is simply really frustrated customers. We like to talk about delightful automation, and if I can somehow pull in the effectiveness of my automation strategy into and seeing that in kind of one overlaid view into my workforce management strategy, right? That's a really interesting point. Seeing that automation piece is yet another agent resource that I'm managing, right? And how is that performing compared to my other people on the team?
Totally. And just to reframe what you said, maybe in a different way, like in our mind, deflection is a vanity metric, right? It's very easy to kind of show your boss kind of, hey, look, we deflected away 30%, contact in 3 months, but you zoom out for a year, right? Like what are the hard metrics that really matter at the end of the day? Customer experience, cost per case, those numbers don't lie, right? And I think holistically kind of like looking at AI in context of that broader problem in a time period where your support team is going to be changing pretty dramatically is kind of, I think, where our head's at in terms of AI.
Yeah, indeed. I want to get your take on one more thing. When you look at the leading contact center platforms out there, right? We talk about Five9 and TalkDesk and Genesys and ICX1 and a lot of the CRM-based stuff as well, Avaya, Cisco. Most of these companies have some sort of workforce management capabilities built into their platforms. But I find it very telling that those same companies, when things get complex, they are actually actively recommending that they look at a purpose-built platform like Assembled. Do you think, why do you think that is? Because you guys have made a big bet and it's paying off. You've made a big bet that this point solution around workforce management is a much smarter way to go than kind of the off-the-shelf bundled solutions that some of the CCaaS platforms have out there. Talk about that for a second.
Well, there's a very funny anecdote that gives you kind of the surface level answer here, which is that everybody looks at workforce management, and they say, how hard could that possibly be? I remember when kind of the head of support at Stripe told us to build it. John and Ryan said, hey, look, I think we can knock this out in a month, and then we can do all the crazy AI stuff that we really want to build, right?
Yeah.
Here we are 6 years later, and infinite roadmap in sight, right? I think there's just a lot of complexity when you're talking about a tool that is so pervasively used across the team. And so I think that part is just underappreciated. And it's not just like some nominal upsell and attach that you kind of can make your investors happy and say, hey, look, so there, I think there's one element there, right?
Yeah.
I think the other element is the simple reality that like very rarely do we see a company that is fully focused on just one platform, whether that's, Five9 or TalkDesk on the telephony side, whether that's, even something as prolific as Salesforce or Zendesk on the CRM side,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And it actually goes back to kind of like the original data point that I keep harping on in integrations, that workforce management is fundamentally an integrations problem, right? It is, how do you stitch together all these systems that are in your network, right? And create sense so that somebody can say, we want to optimize costs, we want to optimize experience, and actually have a system that's fully dialed in, right? And so definitionally, it's hard to imagine a great workforce management platform coming from a single place, right?
Yeah.
Because they're always going to be kind of more incentivized by building their better mousetrap, right? Whether that be telephony or CRM or whatever it is. We actually think a lot of the same principles are true about generative AI, right? I'm sure that like every single company that you just mentioned has their own generative AI strategy.
Sure.
But fundamentally, generative AI is how do you stitch together all these things that are happening on the team to create a better automated support experience.
Yeah.
We think similarly, that's going to be more about how do you bring together all these tools into kind of like, better automation, better quality, better, lower cost, all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
I love that. I want to close with this, Brian. I have we have a mutual friend and a guy named Gershwin Exeter, who's the head of CX. Yeah, head of CX at Thrasio. Really cool, innovative company in the e-com space, and probably the biggest compliment that he can provide assembled is a comment he made to me. I'll paraphrase that. When I have a unique problem in my contact center environment and that I'm trying to solve for, I immediately go to my friends at Assembled, because these guys can think creatively and are nimble to address the stuff that we haven't even thought about yet, right? I think that speaks a lot to kind of the innovation muscle that you guys have built at Assembled, and I commend you guys on that. I expect that's something you hear a lot about.
First of all, thank you for the kind words. And second of all, Gershwin is just a fun hang, so it's not hard to spend time with him.
Sure.
But beyond that, I think that spirit of partnership, that is one of our company principles, right? Is be the best partner, right?
Yeah.
And it's oftentimes the case that head of support, it's just a scary place to be. And unfortunately, that reality is becoming more scary, not less scary, with kind of the increased expectations, where the economy is, where AI is headed, right?
Yeah.
And so for us, it's kind of this flywheel of, understand where support is headed, build the right product. And it's not hard to be there for customers as they're asking for kind of like, different challenges for you to solve different challenges that they're facing, right? And that flywheel leads to great customer experience, and, that makes customer acquisition for us cheaper. And that just is a great flywheel that we've kind of been getting off, and hopefully we'll continue in the future.
Fantastic. That's awesome. I love it. Well, hey, congrats again. Love having you guys in our ecosystem. I love the feedback we're consistently getting from partners and customers right now. So congrats on what you built. It's always fun to birth a big idea and then to see it actually come to life, right? There's nothing like that for those that have this bug around innovation and being entrepreneurs. So congratulations, man. Great job.
Absolutely. Thanks, Andrew. Really appreciate it. And thank you for the audience for listening in.
Yeah, indeed. Guys, that's Brian Zeek, co-founder at Assembled. If you want to learn more about them, click below here at CX Basecamp. Reach out to your friends here at CX Effect. We'd love to talk to you more about how we're driving amazing business outcomes by addressing this problem head on with a modern approach to workforce management. So, Brian, thank you again. Thanks to the Assembled team. We'll talk to you guys all again soon.